So we are going to start with the dry ingredients. First, the flour, the brown sugar, the spices, salt, and baking powder. So take a whisk. This is not a whisk. Take a whisk and make sure you mix it all up. Try to break up as many of those little brown sugar pieces as possible. Alright, now that that is done, let's move on to the wet ingredients. We're going to combine the pumpkin puree. Please, like I always say, make sure you get the pumpkin puree and not the pumpkin pie puree. That way you can add your own sweetness and your own spices. With the pumpkin puree, we're going to add the vanilla, add it to the milk. And then the olive oil. Let's move back to the dry. Alright, so first I'm going to add some olive oil because we need that. And then I'm going to add the onions and the garlic and saute them for just a few minutes, like 3 to 5 minutes. And let them brown and get a little translucent. Right, now it's time to add the puree. Now, after adding the puree, I'm going to immediately add the broth as well as coconut milk and the spices. Okay, so we're gonna start with the dry ingredients first. So into a bowl, we're gonna add the oat flour, the coconut, the protein powder, and the spices. So I'm using the 4 different spices instead of using the pumpkin spice, because if you can't find it, you know which 4 spices to use. Easiest thing to do. So I'm going to take a whisk, mix these right proper, and to this I'm also going to add the salt and the baking powder. Alright. And don't spill any. Okay. That smells incredible. Alright, we're going to move on to the wet ingredients. We are going to add the pumpkin puree. Please make sure to get the pumpkin puree and not the pumpkin spice puree. That is not correct. We're going to add the almond butter. Ooh, it's sticky. Add that in there. To that, I'm going to add the essence. And then just quickly mix this up. You want to make sure you get a good mixture because the almond butter is so thick. You want to make sure the pumpkin puree loosens it up. Alright, to this, I'm going to add just half of the almond milk first. Okay. And then the other half, get it all good and mixed. Once I finish this, we're going to move on to the dry and the wet ingredients. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to combine them and then we're going to add them to a pan that I've already added parchment paper to. So let's go ahead and add the dry ingredients to that. Mix this up. Now listen, if you need more milk, if it's a little too dry, go right ahead and add some extra milk to it. No worries with that. I think this is actually pretty good. Shouldn't have a problem. Yes, it is. Now, before we put this into the pan, I'm going to add some dried blueberries. Okay, let's add it to the pan. First 2 things we have to do, set the oven to 350 degrees and melt the butter. Alright, so while we're waiting for the butter to melt, we're going to again split the ingredients in half and we're going to start with the dry ingredients. So first we've got the flour, add in the pumpkin spice,
NANI?!
That's the pumpkin spice. The baking powder and the baking soda, along with the little salt as well. And make sure they are very well incorporated with each other. Right, that's done. Let's move on to the wet ingredients. The next thing we do, add the flaxseed to some water. So, I'm gonna add the flaxseed to a larger bowl. Now, the general rule of thumb is for every 1 tablespoon of flaxseed, you use 3 tablespoons of water. So, because I really want a thick consistency, I'm only putting in 5 tablespoons of water this time. We're gonna let this sit for about 10 minutes and let it thicken up. And then we'll come back to that when we're working with the wet ingredients. Time for the wet ingredients. Add in the puree, the pumpkin puree. Make sure you get pumpkin puree and not pumpkin pie puree because that's got all the spice and the added sugars and everything. Here, it's plain, you're adding in your own stuff. You know how sweet it's going to be. Next, you're gonna add in your sugars. Now before we add in the other ingredients, we're just gonna mix these up, get them well incorporated, and then add the rest. All right, the sugars are well incorporated into the puree. We're now gonna add in the vanilla, the butter, which has now cooled down a little bit. I think I'm going to switch to the spatula. And the almond milk. Now I'm going to add that a little bit at a time, just so I consistently get a nice smooth mixture here. Don't forget to scrape down the sides as well as get to the very bottom so you don't get any crusty bits, any leftover flour when you're putting the batter into the pans, into the molds. If you don't have a piping bag, you can use a Ziploc bag and then just cut off one of the tips. So I'm using a cup. I've got one of my piping bags here, and all I'm going to do is put the bottom into the container. This just helps to make it easier when you're piping it out, and the cup just makes it easier to hold in case you don't have anybody to help you. Which in most cases you may not, so it's alright. Alright, I've got my scissors. These are ready, oven's ready, time to go. They're gonna go in, at, like I said, at 350 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes. Keep an eye on them. So this is a very simple recipe. We're gonna start with the onions first, add them to the pot. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let them soak. Did I say soak? I'm going to let them sweat for a couple of minutes, turn a slight brown color, and then we'll move on to everything else. All right, so what we're gonna do now is add in the white pepper. Stir that around just for a second. And then I'm gonna add in the pumpkin puree. Please do not add in pumpkin pie puree. You're gonna get a totally different tasting soup. So, add in pumpkin puree. All right, and then I'm gonna add in just about a cup, just to make sure the pumpkin and the water with the broth gets incorporated. Now I'm adding in a total of 4 cups, but I'm gonna do that gradually. Give it about 10-15 minutes and let it simmer. So I'm just going to add the top and leave it alone.
Out of 10, 2 times won't you be mine? We just can't pretend. This love thing can take time. 3 times then I'm in. I heard through the grapevine.